Uh, um, I'm I'm Kay Lehman. I'm the Vice President of Free Thought Arizona, and today we have our speaker is Layal Rabat, and we're really excited to have her here with us. She describes herself as a third culture person, and I wasn't familiar with that term at all, so I looked it up, and it means somebody who was raised by parents of one culture in an area where another culture is dominant, and so that person becomes well, we used to say bicultural, I'm not sure, but it's now called third culture. And most of those people tend to be bilingual or speak several languages, and that's true of Layal too, because she speaks Arabic, right?
Mhm.
And she says her lived experience has led to immigrant rights and public health work, so that's always interesting. And she says she's a researcher of unlimited curiosity, an obsessive collector, and an assembler of information. And she's also seen playing a supportive role, amplifying the voices of those directly affected by injustice in a variety of artistic and educational mediums. So we're looking forward to hearing from Layal today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Every time I hear my bio or I read it somewhere, I want to modify it and change it. So I appreciate it. Yeah, third culture or bicultural are both applicable for sure. So this talk is going to walk you through all kinds of different things in a short amount of time. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions. If the chat feature is not accessible to you, please feel free to just say something. I'm happy to pause and answer any questions that anybody has. So I work as the programs director at a small public health nonprofit. And, a lot of times when I give talks like this, I always skip over talking about myself. But then I realized after a while that people actually want to learn about what I do. So over the years that I've been an activist, I have worked with Phoenix Cop Watch, monitoring immigration raids. I've worked with Phoenix Restoration Project, assisting migrants that were released from ICE custody. I have served on the board of a harm reduction nonprofit, attended countless Black Lives Matter marches and immigration marches. I also helped start up a clinic that provides free healthcare to undocumented community members. I registered people to vote at a ton of concerts over the years since I was like 19 years old and got my citizenship. And I've been to the state legislature and to DC to advocate on a variety of different issues. So these pictures that you see here are me hanging out at the bus station, surrounded by people that were recently released from ICE custody. One of my friends who's a journalist took this photo, and it got into the Associated Press. So now every time it comes up in Google, I get kind of scared. But, I also use it in my presentations because it's really nice to be here among allies and share the things that I do with all of you. The other photo is when I accidentally ended up at the Youth Climate March while I was in Washington, D.C. advocating for reproductive justice. So I've jumped around a lot throughout my life, and there are common themes that unify who I am and all of these things. But to understand how I came to be and how I started doing these things, I had to understand the historic context of where I fit into the context of living in the United States and existing as a person in the United States. So I wanted to kind of share with you some things from history that have helped me shape some of that thinking. So in 1790, the Congress passed the Naturalization Act and it limited applications for citizenship to free white persons considered to be of good character and living in the US for only 2 years. And who gets to be white has changed so many times throughout the history of this country, and it's been codified by law, right? So in 1840, 1.7 million immigrants start arriving from throughout Europe. And a lot of the newer immigrants, particularly the Irish, the Italians, Eastern Europeans, got treated as second-class citizens it wasn't until they gave up their languages and cultures to assimilate into the dominant culture that they got more privileges of being what's considered white, the social construct of whiteness. And in 1883, the term eugenics is introduced by a person named Sir Francis Galton. He believed that it was possible to produce a highly gifted race of men through selective breeding. His theories became pivotal to the creation of immigration policies, laws that banned interracial marriage, forced sterilization, and assimilation schooling. That's where they took Native children from their homes and forced them to assimilate at boarding schools, forbade them from speaking their language, practicing their culture and religious practices. And then you fast forward to 1915, a Syrian immigrant took his case to the court to convince a US district court that Syrians should be considered white. So myself being Syrian and Armenian, learning about the history and understanding what is considered whiteness and what isn't has been a very complicated existence. Sometimes I get to pass for white, other times people recognize that I'm not. And, it doesn't mean that I'm always going to have the same exact experience depending on how I'm being perceived, but it does kind of go into play sometimes. So because of this court case, that Syrian American brought his lawsuit because at the time they were trying to enact laws forbidding immigrants from Asia from coming to the US. And so the Syrian American wanted his family to be able to immigrate to the US. He wanted to be able to stay in the US himself. And so, he took the case to the court so that he can be exempted from the ban on Asian immigrants to the United States. And so when I take the census every year, I'm expected to mark myself as white on the census, even though I'm Asian. I'm from the continent of Asia. I eat rice and make cabbage rolls. I guess a cabbage roll thing is Eastern European. That's like the Armenian side of the family. And it's just a very confusing existence, And right around like 1915, in the context of my own family, my grandmother, who is Armenian, she was immigrating to Syria for safety from the Armenian genocide that was happening in her hometown, where her family was living and owned land and everything. And so I think about those times and I think about, like, what if she had tried to immigrate to the US? Would she have been banned for being Asian? What would have happened to her? On the other side of the family, my father's grandfather actually made it all the way on a ship to Ellis Island, but then got turned back because he didn't bribe the people that were controlling things at the time. So he got turned back to Syria after his parents were murdered in a different massacre. And, so since it's the inception of the model minority myth, model minority has emerged as a way to separate Asian Americans from every other kind of immigrant of color, to show that Asian Americans are all monolith, and this is especially a stereotype for East Asians more than it is for Middle Easterners. But East Asians are seen as like good at math and just all of those different stereotypes. Everybody from Syria is a doctor, an engineer, or a loser, at least according to my family, But the model minority myth was created to create a separation between people. So it categorized people, it lumped them all as just one big population. And then you fast forward to 2001, when I had first gotten my citizenship and realized for the first time in my life, I'm not white. Because up until that point, I lost my accent over time and assimilated. Sure, my food was different. My parents had accents, but I was able to kind of hide from that when I was at school. But then when 9/11 happened, my family faced bullying at work. I got bullied at school. I was in college. I was like gosh, I started college when I was like 17 years old. So I had to have been like 19 in 2001, right about, and barely got my citizenship and was starting to get politically active. And at school, it really felt like, the whole 9/11 thing was my fault. Like I wasn't able to mourn this horrible tragedy with the rest of the country, because at the same time that I was mourning, I was also terrified for my family that lives here. I was terrified for the family that lives back home, that a new war would start in the Middle East. And here in Phoenix, a local man was mistaken for being an Arab because he wore a turban, and he was murdered at his place of business. He was neither Arab nor Muslim. And, my family in particular are Catholic, but when somebody sees my name, when I tell them about my culture, they always make all these assumptions about me. And so that's kind of a little bit of the history. So I wanted to share a little bit about intersectionality and the way that all of our identities come together to provide us with privileges in some senses and disadvantages in others. It doesn't mean that you're all, because of who you are, you will always experience systems and other people in the same exact way. But what the social sciences do is they examine these different identities that people hold when they're trying to describe issues. So Kimberly Crenshaw was a civil rights advocate who coined the term intersectionality. And she described how social identities intersect in systems of oppression. And so this graphic shows, that if you're male, white, European, heterosexual, able-bodied, educated, young, attractive, upper and middle class, speaker of English, have light-colored skin, and belong to a majority religion, and are able to procreate, you are held in a higher regard in a lot of ways. And if you are the opposite of all of those things that I described, you can experience some harmful disadvantages in society. Does that mean that, like, my experience being, I pass for white until I'm not, but also I'm highly educated. Also, my family came here on a green card. I didn't have to come here as a refugee. I didn't have to come here undocumented and then earn my citizenship. And, everybody is a mixture of these advantages and privileges. It doesn't mean that every single time I'm going to experience things in the same way, but it does get taken into account. When we talk about these things, a lot of times people say to me, like, well, why are you bringing up identity politics? When you're talking about race, you're just like making it racist. You're bringing up racism. We should just ignore it. But we can't ignore it, because when I say the word immigrant, you immediately think of the political implications. When I talk about women's reproductive rights, those are also political. And so we cannot remove politics from our identities. We're working toward it. We're hoping to live in a world where who you are does not affect your access to systems, but that's just not the case yet. And so, and there's space to talk about several different identities. I'm using an example of race and racism because it's the easiest to talk about and it's the most visible. But all of those identities face a variety of different barriers. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about laws and identities and things like that, let me check the chat and make sure that I'm keeping up with my homework. Howard, yes, I completely agree that being an atheist, you get distrusted. I've seen all the data on that atheists are like the least trustworthy with the Pew research that's come out. And they are listed on the identity wheel. Let me show you where they are. So where it says majority religion, that is where atheists are listed. So if you are a Christian in the US, then you have all the holidays based around you. And, so when it says, let me see here. So on the bottom of the wheel, minority religion, it's not specifically saying minority religion or lack thereof, but that's where atheism would belong on that wheel. And you do get disadvantaged in some circles for being atheist. I'm atheist too, and boy, is it difficult when people are like, oh, you're from Syria? Is your family Muslim? And I feel like I have to tell them my whole life story, because if I say I'm atheist, then they won't know that like I belong to a Christian minority group from the Middle East. Like I'm ethnically Christian. Armenians were the first like Christian nation in the world. My ancestors were actually like the first Christians. And, you know, it's a complex thing for me to be atheist when my very identity was at risk of being erased in my own homeland, you know? And so, yeah, it's definitely included on the wheel and should be talked about. So I wanted to give you all kind of an overview of data. So far during COVID-19, Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic or Latino community members have had the highest rates of COVID-19 deaths. And with our knowledge in public health, this was very predictable because of a variety of different factors. Being more likely to have jobs as an essential worker, lacking access to healthcare, lacking health insurance, facing racism when they go to the emergency room and different things like that. And we were able to predict these this data. And once again, the statistics show that the Black community and the Hispanic and Latino community and the Native American community are facing much higher rates of death than other communities when it comes to COVID-19. And when we look at life expectancy overall, this chart shows life expectancy from the year 1900 to 2010. We see that white females have the highest life expectancy, followed by Black females and white males, which have a similar trajectory over time. And then Black males are trailing behind everybody. And then we look at maternal mortality rates. So maternal mortality rates in the United States keep rising well above all of Europe and Australia. We have 26.4 deaths per 100,000 live births in the US. The closest country to us is the UK, and they have 9.2 deaths per 100,000, and they're the highest rate in Europe. Then you try to look at Arizona's data, and first of all, data for the Black community is completely missing from this. It got lumped in under other, which is like a catch-all umbrella kind of category anyway. And it creates a lot of difficulty when you work in public health because you're not really able to pinpoint which communities are having the worst problems. But in Arizona in particular, Native American rate is 70.8 per 100,000 live births. The Hispanic or Latino community is 22.4, 17.4 for white, and everybody else gets lumped in at 44 per 100,000 live births. So when you're looking at the US data at 26.4, we've got a lot of problems in Arizona. And why do I care about data? Because I work in public health. It is my job to advocate for better data so that we can better serve our communities. It's my job to study data so that I can have an understanding of the big picture of how racism gets operationalized. And, you know, each person's risk of premature death is largely dependent on their genetics, their individual behavior, and their lived environment. And their access to clinical care, like going to the doctor, getting treatment, having surgeries, is such a small portion of what affects their overall health. But in the United States, we actually spend the most money treating problems that could have easily been prevented by addressing things like individual behavior by providing health education to communities, and also in addressing lived environmental factors like lived experiences and how people connect to institutions. Just checking the chat one more time. Okay, cool. So these are the elements that make up a healthy community. And working in public health makes me realize over time that all of these things are part of my job. And my hope in presenting all this information to you is that one of these categories is something that you can feel passionate about to get involved in, or maybe you work in a sector that touches on one of these. So there's transportation, access to care, affordable quality housing, community safety, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, environmental quality, quality affordable food, community design, parks and recreation, social and cultural cohesion, you know, your sense of belonging, and if you have a good network of people that you connect with, social justice, and goes back around to transportation. All of those things go into creating a healthy community. So that's where the identity wheel connects to all of this, because all the different identities we hold can affect our access to all of these different things that make for a resilient, healthy community. How we engage with each institution and the people that work within those institutions, what identities they hold, and whether they can connect with the experiences of the people that they are helping and assisting. And this graphic shows the difference between equality and equity. So it's a graphic that depicts bicycles. And when we're talking about equality, we're just basically giving everybody, regardless of their ability, the same exact bicycle. It's the same size for everybody, it's not modified. So the person who uses a wheelchair is getting the same bicycle as the person with super long legs, the person that is an average height, and the child. They're all just getting the same exact bicycle. But when we're talking about equity, what we're doing is we're designing a bicycle for each of the people's needs. So the person who uses a wheelchair gets a bicycle where they can use their hands to move themselves. Person with the long legs gets a bigger bike. Person who's average height gets that average bike from the first graphic, and the child gets a child-sized bike. So that's like basically the best way for me to explain the difference between equality and equity. We want both of these things. We want everybody to be treated the same, but we also want to make sure that everybody gets the help that they need in a way that connects to what they actually need. Because it builds for a much better society if everybody can be accommodated, right? So here is a very quick and dirty overview of institutional racism and how it operates. So the local context of how racism is institutionalized, it's through, it can look like overly biased laws. Like I was talking about the quotas for like different kinds of immigrants coming into the US. And we also saw that when Arizona did the SB 1070 laws that disproportionately affected the Latino community, where people could be pulled over if they appear to be undocumented, whatever that means. What is, you know, how does somebody appear undocumented, right? The rules that organizations use. So schools have disciplinary policies, and it, you know, whereas you used to get detention back in my day, now children are being arrested by police and getting records before they even graduate high school. The legacies of racism that perpetuate unequal outcomes, like the light rail in South Phoenix, and then institutional tolerance of racist actions by people in positions of power. So the school to prison pipeline, when we talk about that, we talk about the fact that when they looked at 46 different school districts and charter high schools in Maricopa County, they suspended 20% or more of their Black students from school. The out of school suspension rate for Black students was higher than the rate for white students in all except for like 3 of those schools. So a lot of students locally in Phoenix advocated to get police officers out of their school campuses. And some of them have been succeeding, other ones are still working on it. Overtly biased laws with you know, racial profiling and SB 1070 terrorized their community for so many years. You know, that got me from like doing civic engagement work, just registering people to vote, to actually going out and marching and engaging with a lot of different nonprofits that were leading the immigrant rights efforts. When we talk about the light rail going through South Phoenix, obviously everybody loves public transportation and we want public transportation to be accessible throughout the city, but a lot of people in South Phoenix were very worried that they're going to be displaced from their homes, their businesses were going to be displaced, and everything was going to get gentrified. So, you know, you move out, the landlords sell their land to the highest bidders, and then you get like Starbucks and art galleries and the like. And if you all have like seen how Phoenix has changed over the last few years, you can kind of see how people in South Phoenix might be really worried if their homes and businesses are along the light rail track. And then there was an issue with somebody that complained to their manager because they were being harassed for being Iraqi. Their coworkers were just constantly making commentary about their ethnicity, calling them a camel jockey, and all of those things. And when this person reported it to their manager was like, suck it up, just deal with it. And so they filed a complaint under the EEOC, which I wish the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Can't remember all these acronyms. But basically, they filed a complaint and they were able to get a settlement, because it was a very hostile work environment. I mean, everybody wants to joke and have fun and things like that when they're at work, but when you are being targeted because of your identity, after a while, that it adds up. It can be very harmful to just repeatedly face the same stupid jokes day in, day out at your place of work and not feel comfortable, not feel that sense of belonging that everybody gets to have. So now with that, I've given you history and some data on all of those things, I am going to launch into the strategies. So what do we do about all these things? So these are some of the things that I've done: voter registration, working in coalitions on a variety of whatever issues I'm passionate about, educating policymakers about how their constituents are affected, getting the word out about the census. I live for census data. I cannot wait until the 2020 census data is released so that I know who we have in Arizona and can figure out how to serve all of them. Going to different days at the Capitol. And this graphic here describes the community organizing spectrum of demand for change. Each one of these components is very important, but they increase in levels of how much they challenge existing power structures. So when you're providing a direct service, you're just giving somebody something through a soup kitchen. You're feeding somebody for that day. You're going to the homeless shelter and giving people socks and things like that. And that's super important because people do need direct services, right? Self-help. You open a community kitchen, people show up throughout the day, they take food out of a refrigerator, take it home. That's self-help. They're already starting to address some of those power dynamics that are in play. So you're moving away from a model of, I'm a person that has access to things and I am bestowing you with the privilege of my resources, and you start moving more into, this is how you can help yourself and address the very systemic issues that are perpetuating hunger that we're seeing in our community as we face the fallout from COVID-19 and people losing their jobs and getting evicted, right? So then you move into education and you educate people on how systems work. You talk to the media about how COVID-19 is affecting their communities and things like that. And then you go into advocacy. That's speaking with people who are in power about the issues that face a community. Those are a lot of the things that I do. I go and I talk to politicians about the different things that affect people in Arizona. And I do that on behalf of what I learned from my community. And then you move into direct action, where you are engaging community members into directly advocating for themselves. So if you all go to like the secular day at the Capitol, for example, you're advocating on behalf of yourself. That's direct action. Politicians have to see you face to face, because at the end of the day, I can give all the data in the world, but until the people that are in power really hear stories from people and how they are being affected, and they see that their job as a person who holds office is dependent on the support of their constituents and how much their constituents know that this person is acting on their behalf, that can change the whole world. Each one of these components is super important, but we're always examining things in that way. So I'm going to skip this slide because it's too complex and we're almost running out of time. But basically, action research is what everything I do is based on. It's about creating a feedback loop between what community organizations do and how communities organize. But I can share the slideshow later so that you can look into it. So you can do a lot of these things at your place of work and at any institution that you are involved with. So looking around you and seeing whose voice is missing from the table. What have I done to make my organization a welcoming place for everyone? What connections do we need to make? What advocacy opportunities are there? Ask yourself why you do the work that you do. Ask the people that you're involved with why you do the work that why they do the work that they do. Shared values and knowing what your shared values are as an organization is very important to what you can accomplish together. Making sure that you are doing a lot of self-examination as you plan the policy issues that you want to change. Making sure that you are balancing qualitative data with quantitative data and giving people opportunity to share their stories. And that's how you can create small effective changes at your place of work. Saying that we care about social justice issues, voting, those things are great, but they're not enough. We have to be advocates at every space that we enter. So what I do is I advocate for racial justice in all systems change conversations. I also try to amplify Black-led efforts and Indigenous-led efforts as well. You know, my organization works primarily with the Asian and Pacific Islander community, but we still try to center Black and Indigenous people in our work because they're facing the highest disparities. And, you know, they always say that a rising tide raises all ships. And that's kind of how I view my work, that if we work to uplift the people that are struggling the most, and everybody else will benefit from better public policies. So I show up to events, I donate to Black-led organizations. When I enter a space, I try to listen more than I speak. And I'm always open and willing to receive feedback and learn about things. Because a lot of times when we get super passionate about an issue and we get driven to like enter spaces that we're not used to being in, the first thing that we want to do is like offer all the help that we know and offer like all the knowledge that we have. But a lot of times the most important thing is to show up and listen. You know, and we can always share our stories and our experiences when it's the right time and the place. And also identify the roots of anti-Blackness within our own communities. You know, the person that called the police on George Floyd was an Arab American themselves. And the Arab American community has a lot of work to do on addressing anti-Blackness within the community. And so I found some events that you can attend to learn about what is currently going on in Phoenix. So Mass Liberation Arizona is going to talk about prison abolition, and that's going to be on the 12th, which is like this coming Thursday. And then the National Science Policy Symposium has a talk about science as a tool of racism. That's happening this Friday, which I'm going to try to like sneak off work to go to. And I also have some local organizations that you can support that are listed here, and I can send this out later. And I also have a bunch of reading materials for you because I'm a giant nerd and I always think that people want to read. So I will send all of these PowerPoints. So yes, I can copy. Let me see here. Great, so that's it for my presentation. I kind of tried to like power through some of that. So I know I was talking really fast. Does anybody have any questions?
I think that was worth it.
I wish I could scroll back and look at the slides. I think I had something, but other people go ahead. Thanks for the links. Those are the ones I was talking about.
Yeah, I'm just dropping the links in the chat just so you have it, and I can share the PowerPoint later. Was there a particular slide you wanted me to scroll back to, or?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that I went through a lot of different information and it can be really overwhelming, but my whole point is that there is a place for everybody in making this world a better place. And you can always find an entry point depending on what you're passionate about, whether those issues affect you or your neighbors. And there are always a ton of people that you can ask that have already been doing so much of this work over the years. So, you know, there are places for everybody to get involved and engaged.
I think that's something that I noticed in that slide that had the spectrum of like at the right side, it was self-advocacy and there was group advocacy and so on. I recognize the roles of some of the groups that I'm in there. So like direct service, there's a lot of stuff that TSTAZ does in that category. In education, Free Thought Arizona does a little bit of that with these presentations. With advocacy, Secular Coalition for Arizona does that, and they also enable the direct action with the Secular Day at the Capitol. And I like seeing these different roles that that a group can like expand their vision to try to include.
Yeah, and you know, and they're a way to build community, right? Because if you're providing a direct service, it gives you an in with the community. It gives you the opportunity to engage them in all of the different levels of the spectrum of change. And so they're all very important. It's just that, you know, after so many years of working in public health and seeing the same problems over and over again, I learned about this thing called root cause analysis when you are looking for upstream solutions to solve societal problems that that you're seeing repeatedly. So, you know, so for example, right now with COVID-19 and seeing all these record evictions and things like that, that's a failure of policy around being able to create something that keeps people in their homes. Not only is it more humane for us to have had policies to prevent evictions from happening, but it also makes perfect economic sense because the less people that you have struggling and having to engage with all the different systems, the less money that you're spending. Like when you look at something like the housing first model for homelessness, you realize that it costs an average of right about $12,000 a year or so to get somebody housed. And then if they're living out on the street, because of how much they come in contact with the medical system and different charities and the law enforcement system and things like that, it costs society about like more than $100,000 to have somebody be in the street. I don't have the links for that. Please like look up everything that I'm talking about when I cite statistics off the top of my head. But I just know that it's so much cheaper to keep somebody housed than it is to have them in the street. And you can also assist them better if they are somewhere where you can reach them, right? And so it's really important for us to look at these things and do some like root cause analysis to prevent problems from happening, because like hunger is a system of a larger society, or is a symptom, I should say, of a larger societal problem. It's not a symptom all on its own. And so yeah, being able to engage in the entire spectrum of change at different organizations is really important, and everybody has their role that they can serve.
Yeah. Layal?
Yes.
Do you think you could go back to slide, I think it's slide 31.
Okay.
Could we see it too, please?
Of course. This one?
Yep. Train ourselves on bystander intervention and conflict de-escalation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How does a person go about doing that?
I'm so glad you asked. I have been to a million different de-escalation trainings over the years.
Mhm.
There is a great organization called Hollaback that started up because women were being harassed in the streets of New York City and then the streets of like Cairo, Egypt, and they wanted to train people on how to confront things when they see them out in society, right? Because a lot of times, like if you experience something like that when you're out in public, it can be like scary to intervene on behalf of yourself. But there are ways to get trained so that you can actually confront these things head on. So they give you different strategies that you can feel safe in doing. So for me, my favorite strategy is distraction. So I've been out in public where I've seen like a woman get harassed by a guy that she didn't want to talk to. And especially like when you're a younger woman, you kind of like feel shy or like that you owe somebody a talking to because you're like raised to be polite to everyone and things like that. And I'm like the distraction mastermind. So I'll just walk up, like I just ran into my best friend from 20 years ago and say like, hey, how are you doing? How can I, it's been a long time since I've seen you. Come, let's go over there and talk, and like completely de-escalate the situation. Erase the predator from like the situation. And so these trainings are actually really awesome. They teach you different ways of intervening. So there's like ones for sexual harassment that you see in the street. There are interventions for like confronting racism when you see it. And I can actually look up all those links and provide them to you because there are some really awesome organizations that do that kind of training.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things, like if somebody around me says something racist, I'll just say like, excuse me, what did you say? Or can you say that in a different way? Or what do you mean by that? And it really like helps us use our power and our privilege to do that labor on behalf of the person that is being targeted. Because for a lot of for a lot of people, if they have the appearance of not being white, like if they don't pass for white like I do, they're facing things like that day in and day out, and that adds to a lot of stress in their life. It's actually one of the things that people look into as contributing factors for the high mortality rate for Black women is like the stressors of everyday racism that they face out in the world. And I mean, I could do a whole presentation on like birth outcomes for Black women, and those things add up. And so if we can create ways to intervene and disrupt those things from happening, not only are we helping somebody get out of a bad situation, but we're also helping them feel maybe a little bit less stressed out that day when they're facing those things. So yeah, I'll grab the link for the de-escalation training. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the one that you said was your favorite.
yeah, it's called Hollaback. So I'm just
Could
grabbing
you
the link.
spell that, please?
Yeah, it's I'm putting it right in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oliver already put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank
there you go. Oliver, you already found it. Good job.
I still the
You're
tab
hired.
open.
Could
Yeah.
you spell it out loud for the blind girl, please?
Yeah. I Hollaback. So the letter I, HOLLABACK.org.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'm putting all the links in the chat, and I have text for like all of my different slides that have graphics on them, so I can get all of that to Oliver after this and he can email it out.
I wonder if I could ask you, as a public health advocate, to address a little more comprehensively about the question about, Medicare for all versus the public option, maybe with, Biden in office, he seems to, advocate for a public option as opposed to Medicare for all. I mean, maybe I should preface the question by explaining I've been involved with Healthcare Rising Arizona, which tried to put an initiative on the Arizona ballot that would protect patients with pre-existing conditions. It would have given healthcare workers a raise over 4 years. It would have strengthened infection control protocols in hospitals, and it would have stopped surprise medical billing. So it didn't go as far as guaranteeing healthcare as a right, but it even those few steps were such a threat to the health and hospital industry that they went to court and basically were able to get it thrown off the ballot. Considering the other initiatives passed in Arizona, it might have actually had a good chance of passing. So Healthcare Rising Arizona is trying to continue as an organization to maybe redo the petition in 2022. So I'm wondering what you think of that strategy, first of all, to have Healthcare Rising Arizona try to grow as part of an affiliation with the union. Service Employees International Union is very heavily involved in that. So they're trying to be a dues paying membership organization, which is, both it's an opportunity and a challenge as well. So in terms of the broader issue of what's the best way to promote the reality of healthcare as a right generally, and more specifically, is the strategy of Healthcare Rising Arizona as an organization on kind of the union model of a dues paying membership organization, except not just for workers but for patients, for consumers. Is that do you think going to be an effective way to advance the public health objective of getting everyone the kind of healthcare coverage that everyone needs?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I like the idea of Medicare for all, but technically it's not for all, because it's for all people who qualify for governmental health care in the US. So the issue with that is a lot of people who are undocumented or that have like varying statuses wouldn't qualify for Medicare for all if it did pass. And so that's like, doesn't mean that I'm against Medicare for all. Obviously, I want it because I want everybody to have access to healthcare. But that's like a great voice that's missing within the Medicare for all, is that it's not really for all of the people that live in the US. And so that's like a huge downside of it. Healthcare Rising Arizona, they're one of the organizations that kind of like popped up suddenly over the last few years. I don't know very much about them. I don't know who's funding them. And so I would want to know that before I would be able to tell you whether I support them and what they do or not. I'd want to know who's funding it. I'd want to know which public health organizations that have already been doing public health work in Arizona that they've collaborated with and they've listened to. I want to know like what communities they've connected with on this, and those kinds of things. And one thing that I was also curious about with them, so they want to unionize all healthcare workers, or was this for nurses?
I kind of joined them kind of late in the game when they were trying to, get enough signatures, which numerically they did, but it wasn't just for nurses. It was for, from what I understand, it was for all, healthcare workers, maybe short of doctors and high-level administrators. So I'm pretty sure it's not limited to nurses. they're very much affiliated with, as I say, SEIU and United Healthcare Workers based in California.
Oh,
So
okay.
in a sense, it's kind of an expansion of that union presence into Arizona. I mean, the challenge, of course, in Arizona being a right to work state.
Yeah.
Um, and I think they would, in principle, at least be supportive of everyone, including undocumented people, getting health care. I mean, that wasn't part of the initiative, of course, but just off the top of my head, I think I remember, to their credit, just about all the Democratic candidates raised their hands when the question was asked about, would you include coverage for, undocumented people?
Hmm.
Maybe Biden was the only exception to that. I don't quite remember in his case, but maybe he could be, pushed in that direction.
Hmm.
Maybe Kamala would do that if in an optimistic scenario. So
Yeah.
that's
We'll see what happens when the dust settles on the House and the Senate too, because,
right. Well, I mean, I hope you check out Healthcare Rising Arizona. They have a website that you could find, I'm sure, and someone, as I said, they're trying to regroup as an organization after that defeat in the courts, and certainly someone with your expertise, if you think it's a good place to spend some time and energy, that would be a great thing.
yeah, I mean, I would want to know like who is funding them, and I want to know like what work they've done in the public health landscape that already exists in Arizona if they're coming in from California to do that. And so, you know, obviously I would support anything that like moves us toward like progress for everybody. But I feel like I've seen the ballot initiative that they're doing, but I just can't remember the details of it. But I'd love to look at it again and see, if they're regrouping and trying to do something else for, to bring up at the next election that we have. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Layal.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for the work you do and for sharing it with us today. I think that's it's important stuff that you're doing, and it's important that our membership hears about it. The question I had for you has to do with your comment that I think we've all been privy to the facts that the Black, Hispanic, and other disadvantaged communities disproportionately suffer morbidity from COVID infections. And I was wondering if there was any real research being done about genetic factors as opposed to environmental factors affecting these populations. Obviously, there's a lot we don't know about COVID at this point, but I was wondering if there was any specific research being done on those areas, trying to separate the environmental issues from possible genetic components.
Well, I don't know that they're doing specific like genetic components of like different racial groups, because it would be very difficult to do, since the people in the Black community come from like all kinds of different parts of Africa. People from the Latino community come from all, they're indigenous to all different parts of the continents of the Americas, and mixed with Spanish, ethnicities for some part. And so it would be very difficult to undertake something like that. The only things that I've heard about like a genetic component in COVID-19 is there are certain like blood types that might be more immune. So if you had data that like showed any racial differences across blood types, maybe there is, but I don't know of anything like that. Most of the data that we have points to different environmental factors. but it's also like way too early for us to say anything is definitive because it's brand new. It just happened this year. It's just that the data that we have that talks about which communities face disparities on a more routine basis all ties it to different environmental factors and the industries that people tend to work in, and how people get treated when like they go to get care at the ER. There are whole studies about when Black women go to the ER, people think that they're exaggerating or like their pain doesn't get believed, for example. And that also factors into the birth outcomes. But I don't know that like anything is being done, to explore that genetically. I do have all eyes on this really awesome project called All of Us that, that might shed light on some of that, maybe. It's so it's basically All of Us, allofus.nih.gov is a website, and it's the biggest health research data set of all time. The government collected blood samples and I think like urine samples from a bunch of different people all across the country so that they can process that information and do genetic research on a huge sample size all at the same time. They're trying to get to 1 million people participating in this. And my organization did recruitment for the studies because we work with Asian and Pacific Americans and Native Hawaiians, and they wanted scientists to have like a sample size already there to run medical data against. And it's a really, really huge project that they're undertaking. So maybe someday when they've been able to like process all of that data, we can have some of that information that you're talking about. But for the most part, I really haven't heard of that being connected to genetic differences at all from all the information that I've had. Oh, that's cool, Oliver, that you did All of Us. I participated in All of Us also because I wasn't going to tell my community members, hey, go sign up and give your DNA to the government, but that's not something I would do. So yeah, it's really exciting. I can't wait for the data from that to come out. They need to get to work on that because like every time I go on the website, they just want me to take more surveys, but they don't have any of my information they promised. Anything else?
Anybody got anything? Well, if not, thanks so much, Layal. This was a really good presentation, and I look forward to the link to the presentation, and I'll put that on. I'll put a link to that on the Facebook event, and I will try to put it in the meetup event as well. And I'll see if we can get Avery to send out a link to view your slides.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, everybody. I wanted to leave you all with a quote because that's what I do. I read a lot of things. So a lot of times when we talk about social justice issues, a lot of people say things like, well, if people just did this and people just did that. So Dr. Paul Farmer wrote a book called Infections and Inequalities, The Modern Plagues. And he said that there is nothing wrong with underlining personal agency, but there's something unfair about using personal responsibility as a basis for assigning blame while simultaneously denying those who are being blamed the opportunity to exert agency in their lives.
Hmm.
That's one I'll have to think about. Process.
Yeah. Great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us
Yeah.
today. It was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Very, very important and informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's going to be a fun legislative session. So I'm
Oh.
excited.
Oh, yeah. Even at the state level, I'm sure.
It could have been more fun.
Yeah.
We don't want to go there.
Could have been more fun. Wait till next time.
Yeah. Well, the work starts tomorrow. So
Well, we got work to do now. That's true. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Midterms are 2 years away.
Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.